Good afternoon and welcome to this City Council work session, February 19th. And we are going to go into executive session. The Eugene City Council will now meet in executive session held pursuant to ORS 192.6602E to deliberate with persons designated to negotiate real property transactions. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations. I don't think there's anybody here. Except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we may return to open session and welcome the audience back into the room. for the signal. All right, we are reopened into a city council meeting following up on discussion about the negotiations with the Northwest Natural Franchise Agreement, the process, where we are in the process, and we are going to put a motion on the table to allow this negotiation to continue.
I move to direct the city manager to schedule a public hearing on an ordinance extending by 6 months the term of Northwest Natural Gas Company's franchise agreement.
Second? Somebody second this? No one?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right.
You looking at me?
All right, all in favor of extending the franchise discussions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 opposed, 1. All right, it passes. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for that, that discussion. And now for something very interesting and different. We are ready to talk about our wildland fuels reduction.
Right. Just got to give a few people time to get up to the table. By a few people, I mean you. You with the badge.
I'm going to stand up so they can have my spot.
Thanks.
Yep,
Yeah, there's going to be a couple of
100%.
folks, and I'm going to actually step back once I get them introduced.
Yep.
So if that works.
On it.
Got a couple of handouts if we could do that real quick as well. So if you're at the table, come on up, grab a seat. Whatever you guys want. Yep.
We won't bite, I promise.
They already.
Not at first, anyway.
Some of these folks do.
Thank you.
Quite team. Yeah, you want to join us? Deputy City Attorney.
Good afternoon, mayors, councilors. Good to be here today with an exciting presentation of a follow-up of some one-time funding that was presented during budget last year. It was $200,000 to do some wildland urban interface work. So I brought the team up to present that to you today. I think this defines the prefix of the word multi. When we start talking about multi-agency, multidisciplinary, multi-geographical areas, the list of reasons or pieces just continue to go on. Other pieces with this is not only with the $200,000, but I certainly want to recognize all the in-kind contribution that many of these agencies threw into this program to ensure its success, along with the timing. You know, the budget closed out in June, and then we were getting right into the 4th of July, and it was, okay, so what are we doing about wildland urban interface reduction? It's like, okay, we're going to get this process going. It takes a little bit of time to get it going. And it was also in addition to what we had already had planned and fire season and those types of things. So the other nice piece is, while it hadn't been released yet, you're going to see some ties to the governor's Wildland Policy Committee. So while it hadn't been released until October, this team was actually working on making sure many of those objectives were met with this program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team that made this happen, and I'll start off with Amy Linder, who's our fire marshal.
Good afternoon.
I'm sure you can.
Gotcha. All right, good afternoon, councilors. And we have quite a team of folks to present for you this afternoon. So this project really kind of spurred out of some growing concern for wildfire, a lot of heightened public awareness with what happened in Paradise, what's going on in Australia. We received started getting a lot of calls. What can we do? What are you doing? How do we address this? And we really needed to think globally about how we improve our community's resilience to wildfire. As Chief said, it is a multifaceted problem, and we needed a multifaceted approach. And the best way to do that was to get a team of people to work on the project. We had some really 4 main focuses of our project, which were community engagement, education, some actual on-the-ground fuels reduction, and some workforce development. So we organized some partners, developed a collaborative to really approach it from a multi-dimensional aspect. We were very mindful of the scale of the project and the tight timeline that we were under to make sure that we didn't bite off more than we could chew to get going. So a big magnitude of the situation could be really overwhelming. So again, we really just took off the first bite. And to do that, we kind of created what we sort of dubbed as a pilot project. So we looked at a neighborhood, already established neighborhood association, the Southeast Neighbors. They had an existing interest. We had already been receiving some calls from that neighborhood asking about what they could do to reduce the risk. They had some leadership of their neighborhood association that was really engaged and wanting to partner and could help us reach further into the neighborhood. So they were eager to partner with us. And that particular neighborhood also has some joint protection areas with one of our partners, the Oregon Department of Forestry, and a good connection into our trails and recreation. So we were able to leverage all of the resources of our partners to make an impact here. It also allowed us to engage with some of our larger community partners like 4J and some of the schools they had and some of the surrounding, forested area of both Charlemagne Elementary, Edgewood Elementary, and we're able to partner with 4J as well. So some of our key results that came out of the project that we're really proud of is the amount of community engagement. Again, both from actual individual property owners and neighbors to the Raptor Center, 4J, some public partnerships as well. And to be able to educate through neighborhood meetings and empower them to take action on their own property. We could give them some education, we could give them a good start with some on the ground fuels reduction, but also give them the tools and the ability to maintain that going forward. We were able to do boots on the ground fuels reduction both on public and private land. And in some of those areas, some of the public right-of-way work that was done was more important to some of the neighbors as it was right adjacent to their yards and their backyards, and they were like, I can only do so much on my property, what are you doing about this? And we were able to coordinate with those public agencies to allow us to come in and do some of that reduction, and then that inspired the homeowner, great, if you're gonna do something, I'll do something too, and make that a bigger swath. And then that actual on-the-ground work was a wonderful opportunity to develop some young skills through the Youth Corps, who will be speaking here in just a moment, development for young adults. We were able to hire an intern to get some program coordination skills, as well as the actual SAW work and coordination and how does it affect habitat and tree health and lots of different aspects we were able to tie in, not just the wildfire component. A few of the takeaways we learned throughout the pilot project were that it was, again, a very complex problem. We needed to be very thoughtful about many aspects with resource protection, both of our natural resources and how to best use our people resources, what the impact to our recreation areas were, economic, environmental, and health impacts. There's only certain times of the year certain trees can be cut. We had to be mindful of bird habitat and nesting seasons and fire season. And so coordination of timing of when we could actually get in and start cutting stuff was a little bit challenging to coordinate. So timeline balancing and just balancing with the other pieces that we all had going on. So I'm going to introduce some of our partners. They were instrumental in making this come together. We all have a piece in the wildfire problem and concern. So I'm going to start off with Alex Romlo with Oregon Department of Forestry.
Good afternoon, counselors. Appreciate this over here a little bit. All right, is that good? Okay. All right, so I am Alex Romlo. I'm with the Oregon Department of Forestry out of the Western Lane District. So our headquarters is there in Veneta. We actually do share a protection boundary with the city of Eugene. So the southern portion of your city limits, we actually do have a protection boundary. And we respond to fires in that area every year. So far, we've been lucky enough to catch those fires before they've turned into a large event. But ODF has been out there for about 100 years, and we started with meals. And 10 years ago, we got an ODF fuel crew. We didn't have meals up until that time, but about 10 years ago is when we started our prevention program. And our prevention program has about 4 full-time seasonal staff that go out and do defensible space treatments with private property owners. So a lot of what we saw in this this Eugene collaborative is what we do out in the landscape across Lane County in our district. We bring about $8 million in the last 10 years from federal fuel grant funding. So a lot of that resources have been applied to the South Hills, Fox Hollow, that area. But a lot of what we try to do, as Amy already mentioned, is just really coordinate partners and priorities around the issues of wildfire, and how do we create those resilient communities, right? So we engage these private property owners through helping them establish defensible space. We support communities by encouraging resilience. When we talk about an event like Paradise, long-term planning and prevention would have been the only way to mitigate the impacts of that type of scenario. Catastrophic wildfire, with enough planning and preparation, you can reduce those impacts. And so that's really what we're looking at doing here. The rate of return, we talk about education a lot. We're out there doing community education quite frequently, and there's an interesting return on investment for prevention activities, up to 35 to 1. And if I could get a 35 to 1 ROI on my 401k, I might be sitting here talking about how to do that. But it's really good. And the other thing that we educate on is exclusion really isn't an option. So it's not if, but when. And so we really do appreciate your foresight in investing in this project prior to that large event. For the collaborative, what we really provided was technical expertise and logistical support. The majority of, I would say, the first month and a half of work, given that short timeline, was kind of leveraging, establishing resources that we had made through community meetings. So we had pre-identified landowner support, communities that needed the fuel reduction in an area that overlapped with, obviously, the focus area of this program. We provided a number of training opportunities with Northwest Youth Corps and did quite a bit of treatment consultation. So is this good fuel reduction? We have a wildlife concern. How do we pair fuel reduction with these other concerns? And in conclusion, I just do want to say that, we can do this, It's a complex social and environmental issue, and I think a galvanizing topic is wildfire. We can reduce risk, restore forests, and solidify community identities, and I think we proved that concept with this project. In the future, I hope that this continues into a potential program. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, next up is Craig Carnegie with Parks and Open Space.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This collaborative fuels reduction project was a great success and really dovetailed nicely with some of the goals the Parks and Open Space Division has had in place for many years. Preserving our forests and native ecosystems, reducing invasive species, and keeping our community safe from the risk of wildfire are all things we share in common. As already mentioned, our community is increasingly aware of the potential of a catastrophic wildfire, and residents want to know what the city is doing to address this issue. This project significantly helped address those community questions and concerns by offering outreach and education directly at the neighborhood level, helping spread awareness and spur action. Parks and Open Space was able to support this project by leveraging our existing relationships with neighborhood leaders in the Southeast neighborhood, as well as the community partners such as 4J, to identify projects that could be implemented by the Youth Corps. Our urban forestry staff brought their expertise and hard work to the project, as well as provided hands-on job skill training to the youth who participated. Shifting from the neighborhood scale to the larger landscape scale, as I mentioned before, we've been engaged in reducing hazardous fuel loads in our natural areas for several years. Our ecological services team has been leading this work. And on this map that you see up here in orange, that's where the projects are located, predominantly in the Ridgeline Park system, but also sites closer within urban areas such as Skinner Butte and Hendricks Park, where there is both high public use as well as high fire risk. And since 2015, the Bureau of Land Management's Community Wildfire Assistance Program has granted $460,000 to the city in direct funding and another $300,000 of their own work to remove dense vegetation from over 375 acres within our system. These projects not only reduce the hazardous fuel loads on park properties, but many have also restored rare native oak and prairie habitats and have opened up some of the newer ridgeline parklands for recreational and public access. Both of these projects at the larger landscape scale and working with this collaborative fuels reduction program for neighborhoods is having real impact to reduce the risk of a large-scale fire within our community. And Parks and Open Space Public Works looks forward to partnering with this team again in the near future.
Great, thank you. And Matt Springer from the Northwest Youth Corps.
I'm Matt Springer. I'm our programs director at Northwest Youth Corps. For those of you that aren't completely familiar with our organization, we're a local nonprofit that does the vast majority of our work sort of out of this area. So it's great to get to be a part of a collaborative working here locally. In funding this project, you had many options in terms of how to get the work done, the boots on the ground work that Amy mentioned. And by partnering with NYC, you effectively leverage those project dollars to accomplish some other critical outcomes. So during this pilot, we engaged 16 young adults in workforce development and leadership programming, and one paraprofessional intern to help coordinate the overall effort. Our program targets marginalized populations, youth that are neither connected to post-secondary or to the labor market initially. And you help provide those young people with 9,000 hours of practical training, 760 hours of formal training that included USDA chainsaw certifications, training in heavy machine operations, an introduction to ODF's WUI framework and defensible space, and a ton of soft skills. And I think ultimately those soft skills are not just helping you accomplish that work, but are going to turn folks into practical contributors into this community in particular. So with that, the one thing I'd like to emphasize is just the partnership approach to this is essential. We can be really effective partners when we know where we're going and what we need to do, and we really relied on the expertise of folks at this table in identifying both the partners we were going to work with, what those treatments look like, et cetera, and that really helped our youth be successful and the project be successful overall. I think one of the other major benefits we were able to provide is doing this work during fire season really requires us to create another workforce to get it done if that's sort of the target space. And in many ways, that's a good time to accomplish some of this work. And so by creating a youth force to take this on, we're not making use of the experts and bringing them out of fire season to do this work as well. So we really appreciate being involved, and we hope you'd agree that in involving the Youth Corps and a workforce development element in this project really help leverage the dollars that you provided to the project in general.
Thanks, Matt. So in summary, this was a great example of a way that we could work better together as a community, as public agencies, as well as engaging our community organizations as well. But there's still a lot to do. Again, this was a bite-sized chunk, and in our conversations as a collaborative, we started identifying just how far those threads reached and other people that we could invite to the table to continue that conversation of how we continue to build that framework and keep some continuity as we build that defensible space. Parks and Open Space mentioned their partnership with the Bureau of Land Management and BLM and the work that they've done, and they have a big role in that as well. Some areas that have some Forest Service connection, as well, all the way down from the federal to the individual community and neighborhood level with our neighborhood groups. We've worked with ODF extensively in this project, but also engaging state emergency management, our local emergency management. CERT had kind of a role in this. They began getting interested in hosting additional meetings and how could they keep the momentum going. That's a big piece of, now that some of the work has started, how do we maintain that? It keeps raining, the sun keeps shining, and things keep growing. So we need to make sure that homeowners have a good understanding, and those property owners, of how we maintain that and how we do that on the public side as well. So engaging all of those agencies, and then as well as our Nature Conservancy, the watershed councils, they also do a lot of work in wildfire prevention and fuels reduction, and just how those all tie together so that we're not all doing similar things in different areas, but leveraging that synergy of how we do work better together and bringing together all of our values of stewardship and economic health and risk assessment, social, making sure that everybody had an opportunity. That was one of the great pieces of this project. One of the neighborhoods or little subdivisions in the neighborhood that we worked at was Woodleaf Village. That was a development where they just didn't have the financial resources to maintain some of the common spaces in there. And they were super supportive and welcomed us in to do work along there. And then again, everything from individual properties to the larger as well. So great team. It was a great project. I think we built a lot of goodwill in the community, and hopefully the momentum will continue. So happy to answer any questions.
That's great. I have Emily and Mike and Alan. So take it away, Emily. Betty?
Thank you so much. This is such an important amount of work. I used to design interpretive panels and traveling displays for the Forest Service, and it was exactly about this, about defensible space, with pictures of the destruction, pictures of the fires, pictures of what it looked like before and either burnt or if you had done this treatment. So this is really important for our neighborhood, our city, our environment. But putting all that aside, this is incredible. This is an incredible example of how we can actually save the world. Look at all of these organizations coming together with a common goal, listening to each other, collaborating, facing challenges like inexperienced workers and the summertime season. To have this kind of success and to know that it's a continuing project, I'm so glad we gave the money to get this going. And I want everyone to know that this is so much more than defending ourselves from wildfire. I would like everyone to know about this project and this team so we can all copy it. Thank you.
All right, Mike?
I appreciate and agree with a lot of what Emily just said there with regard to everybody working together. I think that's awesome. That's how we stay safe. So good job, everybody, for that. With regard to ongoing educational stuff that you do around this, especially with kids, while I was watching the last slide there, I thought, I wonder if we could have a special area use of Smokey the Bear for the sake of educating kids, considering that he lives 30 miles north of here. Maybe we make use of that somehow. I don't know how, but just thought occurred to me. After all the work that you've done, you have more to do, no doubt, as the year progresses and we get into the summer. I know this sounds like a simplistic question, but it helps other people who don't get all the information we get know and understand parts of this. What percentage safer are we now than before we started this effort? Are we 25% safer or 50% safer in our community from a catastrophic wildfire than we were before? I know that I'm looking for a way to talk about it with other people.
Yeah, I wouldn't say
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
I wouldn't say that there's a particular percentage because, as pointed out earlier, this is a pilot program, and we've literally scratched the surface when you look at the vastness of our South Hills and Southwest Hills and that whole urban interface area and what it looks like. So I would be remiss to put a percentage on that, especially so much of it is intangible from the education perspective that went out. And just the fact that we're heightening the awareness. I know as a kid who grew up running around in the South Hills, we never had any thoughts about these types of things and other than mowing the lawn. And I think as we're moving forward and with our climatic changes, the more education we're getting out and people are making reasonable changes in their own property with types of vegetation that they're planting, the fact that they're limbing things up and we're not letting things go to the ground, and having truly a different perspective on how we manage our own property is our biggest success in this piece. And then we'll back that up with the mitigation strategies of fuel reductions, and then unfortunately, if we have to respond to something, we're prepared to do that as well. So I would be remiss on that one, Counselor.
No, I understand entirely. I'm just looking for ways to talk about it. Thank
Okay,
you.
Alan?
Yeah, this is an awesome project, you guys. This is fantastic. The collaboration is exactly the type of stuff that we should be doing, especially in this space. And I love having all those logos up there. So, and this becomes extremely important as we move forward, especially as climate change increases the amount of wildfire we're going to see in our community. Unfortunately, if you guys are really successful, no one will ever see what didn't happen, which is their house burned down. But hopefully through the education, they will appreciate it, that they didn't have to go through what people in California had to go through. What's next with this? This is the pilot, and so what happens and how do we expand this through the entire southern part of the city all the way out to your office?
And that's the million-dollar question. This was really a limited, one-time funds dedicated that we spun up rather quickly. that did present some challenges just in terms of timing and reprioritization of other work on the books, and to really dive in and systematically break down some of the communication and interagency challenges of process of how we get resources and what goes where. It really would take a much larger planning effort and a strategic planning over several years, funded with a coordinator to march that across the South Hills. Part of the reason we chose such a small area is we didn't want to take a shotgun approach and pepper areas with defensible space, but to begin to find ways that we could build that continuity. And the idea was to start in the southeast and then slowly march it west along the hills to get that space going.
Well, I hope, City Manager, that we see this in upcoming budget processes. That I think that makes a whole lot of sense, and this is an extremely important topic and thing to be funding.
Okay, Betty?
Thank you. I live in the area that is most likely to burn, and I represent that area. I have had neighbors knock on my door and say, "What are you doing?" When things get very dry in the summertime, and telling me that there are yards above me where there is dry grass, and who can make them clean it up or cut it down. I think you're right, things keep growing, and especially in Oregon. I've seen places that I hadn't seen for a year that look like jungles and also property owners change. So educating the property owner doesn't necessarily last. I could see it being a constant chore. I think that what needs to keep growing is the neighborhood dedication to doing something. And the more we can encourage that and expand it, the better it is. I guess I still think we should ban fireworks. I have heard people near me say, "Oh, the grass is on fire on the 4th of July." And that can happen from legal fireworks as well as illegal ones. And a fire in South Eugene in the summertime would be like another paradise, I think. And the important thing is to prevent it before it happens. And my question is, what could the city do in the way of, is there anything we need to do in the way of passing ordinances or making requirements or doing fines or what?
So definitely one of the pieces that is part of the long-term strategy is engaging with our planning department, our building department, in looking at, as new things are being built or remodeled or permitted activity, there are some provisions coming out statewide in some of those codes that are beginning to be ready for local adoption, where we could require people to have some defensible space, depending on how severe the hazard is, could require some ignition-resistant construction. And so those are some things that we'll start engaging with our partner agencies across the city to have that conversation. Part of that relies on some of the work that this team has done in assessing the hazard in which areas and what that looks like. So that's one tool that is in the toolbox as well as the ongoing education and looking at those things like you mentioned, the weed enforcement, grass, what those regulations look like and how we enforce those.
I think a strong nuisance ordinance which is enforced could help, but I've had many calls too from people who live next door to a house that isn't occupied, where there is a pile of firewood and tall grass and other trash around, which is, all that is a fire hazard in the dry season. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I just want to say a couple of things, and one is following up on a couple of comments. I thought it was interesting, the comment you made about the CERT volunteers. I think we're always thinking about ways in which we can sort of keep them mobilized and activated. They get that training, they invest in it, and then it's hard to know where to plug them in, and this feels like an excellent place to plug them in, so I was glad to hear you mention that. And following up on Betty's comments about the nuisance code, I mean, I'm canvassing around town, and I know in my own neighborhood that there are houses that are really not in good shape, that they have a lot of vegetation around them, dry, they're not cleaning up. And so I guess I am sort of interested in what that nexus is with CERT volunteers, with neighborhood associations, with how we help our neighbors, not in a punitive way, but in a constructive way, to get in there and help make themselves safer. And that feels like a really important kind of public education piece. And I am thrilled about the Northwest Youth Corps being part of this. And I want to say that a year ago in 2019, when we went to Washington, D.C. for the annual United Front trip, we met with U.S. Forest Service, and you hadn't started. The money was available. The council had just approved it. The money hadn't started, and we presented it, and the Forest Service director was so excited about the prospect for this project and wanted to see it. So I just actually want to put that back on our radar, that the national level, they wanted to see this work. There might be more support for it at a national level, that it's really they were pretty excited about the model it represents. So thank you for, I really think it's extraordinary work and very exciting to hear about it. So thank you very much. Great report. And actually, we're done. I think we're going to finish on time. So thank you for your patience waiting for us to be ready for you. Appreciate that. And with that, we're adjourned.